The moment my empire fell, I was wearing a coffee-stained hoodie, not exactly the outfit for damnation. The first thing to die was the light. My penthouse went from crystalline chrome magazine spread to a low-budget horror set in one breath: bulbs, coughing, dimmers stuttering, the floor-to-ceiling windows pulsing with stormlight from the river. The rain had been gentle at dawn. Now it lashed Manhattan sideways, drumming the glass like a debt collector. Then my monitors bloomed awake. Every single one of them, throwing the room into a jagged aurora. Not charts, not the soothing scrolling of ticker tape. Just block letters stenciled in emergency red: account frozen. Another window popped: investigation pending. A third announced itself like a verdict: warrant issued. Cute? I said into the empty room. Because sarcasm is the last coat of armor you get before the knives. I'm Rhea Morgan, 29, ex-Wall Street broker turned independent consultant, which is respectable code for hacker who prefers to be paid in stablecoins and silence. My life, until exactly now, ran on caffeine, latency, and the small private religion of being first. First to see the flaw. First to exploit it. First to exit before anyone smelled smoke. Except today, the smoke was already in my lungs. I threw my hoodie over the sports bra I'd slept in, tucked bare feet into cold leather slides, and crossed to the main desk. The motion sensors lagged a half-second behind, glitching the room into frames. The storm turned the skyline into a broken circuit board, windows winking on and off like dying stars. "Show me logs," I said, and my home system, bless her anxious synthetic heart, obeyed. The graphs were clean. Too clean, like someone had scrubbed my servers and left a lemon-scented apology. My fingers moved because they knew the ritual. I tunneled through my own architecture and found directories with perfect permissions pointing to rooms that had been emptied an hour ago. "God," I whispered. Because sometimes you need a word big enough to hold the panic. Not yet. The elevator chimed. Not the elegant hush of a neighbor's arrival. This was a hard metallic ding that didn't belong in $1,000 air. A second later, the building channel lit up: security escort en route. "Please remain where you are." "Of course," I said. "I'll set out cookies." I yanked my travel drive from the back of the primary tower. The one no one ever sees until you lift the smoked glass panel with a suction cup. My thumbprint shook. The reader blinked green anyway. Outside, thunder laid a hand on the building and pressed. The intercom crackled. "Miss Morgan? This is NYPD Financial Crimes and the SEC. We have a warrant to search the premises." They were polite. That was the part that terrified me. I set the drive into my pocket, slapped the hidden panel closed, and kneeled by the wall safe. I'd installed it myself. There's a particular joy in laying steel behind marble. Inside, a pistachio tin with 2 titanium keys and a burner phone wrapped in pink hair ties. Don't judge me. The hair ties were from a happier, messier time, in a bathroom that didn't smell like ozone and fear. "Ms. Morgan," the intercom insisted. "Brisk now, please open the door." Another monitor flashed a thumbnail that made my stomach cold. It was a screenshot of a live news broadcast. The caption called me the Queen of Greed. Okay, points for tabloid cadence. And the anchor said my name like it tasted good. Words scrolled. Rhea Morgan accused of collusion with charitable crypto fund. Below, a photo of me at a gala. Hair up, dress like a sharp intake of breath. Smile weaponized. "You picked the picture where I look like I eat interns," I muttered. Great. I opened the door a slice. The hallway carried the metallic scent of rain and pressed suits. 2 agents stood with umbrellas and soft voices. Behind them, 3 uniforms, patient and bored. "Ms. Morgan," the lead agent said, showing me the paper. "We're here to—" "I read," I said, sharper than I meant to. "1 minute." I shut the door. It was a small, petty act of control, and the only one I had left. The panic tried to sprint, to flay me open from sternum to throat. I pressed it down with a palm to the cool marble counter. Keys, Rhea, I told myself. Not metaphors. I moved. The first titanium key opened the service corridor nobody uses because the hidden architecture of expensive living is ugly: pipes, cables, ladders with chipped paint. The second key turned the deadbolt on the maintenance stairwell. I slipped into its throat, hoodie up, travel drive hot against my skin. Down, 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 my breath counting like a metronome. At the 23rd floor I heard boots above and below, and thought of wolves on a staircase. I cut sideways into the service level, crossed a maze of beige walls and mop buckets, and came out into the auxiliary lobby, the one for people who carry things rather than own them. On the street, New York had dissolved. Rain stitched the world into one gray fabric. I hunched deeper in the hoodie, kept my face down. Neon from the bodega sign smeared across puddles like a bleeding logo. The first burner phone call I made was to Eli. He'd been my colleague once. My friend, briefly. He was a brilliant coder and a coward with nice cheekbones. I forgave the second because the first made us money. He knew my algorithms better than anyone on this planet except me. The call rang out to voicemail. His voice arrived, pleasant and non-committal. Leave a message. A different ping played in my ear. An alert from the last server that still loved me. Transfer to E-Ward confirmed. The rain could not be responsible for the way my throat closed. I stood in the doorway of an all-night co-working space that smelled like rosemary and hot dust, and let the betrayal do what it does. Drain. Then burn. He hadn't even changed the initials. That was the indecency of it. You steal a woman's heart, fine, you at least rename the file. Okay, I said to no one, because sometimes you narrate for the camera the universe pretends not to hold. Plan B. The receptionist glanced at my soaked hem and waved me in with the weary kindness of someone who lives on tips and tea. I took a pod in the back, white plastic shell with the emotional warmth of a capsule hotel. The world shrank to a curved desk and a chair that understood posture better than most managers. I jacked in. My servers were bone fields. Whatever had hit them did so with theologian precision. No jaggedness. No ego, just the clean satisfaction of a tool that fits the hand. I tried the back doors, the side doors, the doors that aren't supposed to be called doors at all. The response was a series of polite refusals. Denied. Denied. Denied, I sang under my breath, off key. At least take me to dinner first. I pulled logs from the last hour. There, like the damp imprint of a hand on a polished table, sat an access signature I'd written in grad school and sworn never to use, a master skeleton key I'd fabricated to show off and then locked away. The copycatting was bad. The timestamp was worse. Eli had been on my servers 10 minutes before the first alert. You took my bones, I whispered, and heard how melodramatic it sounded, and decided I didn't care. My hoodie clung to my wrists like a pet I'd offended. Outside the pod, someone laughed too loudly at a joke about venture capital and veganism. I envied them their harmless problems. The news screens over the coffee bar ran a split-screen dramatization of my fall. A headshot of me. Hair like cut silk, eyes rimmed with eyeliner that suggested, I have a favorite private jet. Sat opposite drone footage of my building. Words crawled. Analysts analyzed. Strangers in comments pronounced me a witch and a genius, with equal confidence. Make up your mind, I told the ceiling. Monster or miracle. The CO working manager slid a glass of water through the pod's pass. Through without looking at me. The kindness of the overstretched. I mouthed, thanks I didn't deserve, and went back under. I tried a different angle. Not my servers, those were cremated, but my clients' endpoints. If a single node still pinged, I could backtrace to a shadow. The screen filled with refusals like a field of little red flags in a ruined orchard. Then a window opened by itself. It was small, old school. with a retro pixel border that would have been charming if I hadn't wanted to crawl out of my skin. You've been chosen for an alternative investment. Do you accept? No salutation, no contact info, just the kind of arrogance that wears good shoes. I typed. Wrong girl. The cursor blinked, then answered like a smile. On the contrary, I glanced around the co-working space, as if the sender could be hiding behind the espresso machine. The room kept being the room. The rain kept being the rain, chewing the city's edges. Do you accept? The old me, the one who wore structured blazers and belief, would have closed the window on principle. The current me was running out of principles that paid rent. Fine, I said, speaking to the pod as if it were a confessional. Mystery investors with melodramatic fonts. Maybe I do deserve damnation for the hoodie. My finger hovered above the trackpad. If this was a trap, I was already in it. If it was a lifeline, it came knotted. I pressed yes. For a second, nothing. Then the screen shivered. Black text poured down like rain. A waterfall of ones and zeros. The binary swiveled mid-fall, aligning, composing itself into an emblem I didn't know my eyes knew. A ring of fire. Not drawn, rendered, alive. The edges licked at the glass of the pod screen, without heat. Within the circle, a symbol like a contract sigil married to a currency sign, flickering, deciding on a final shape. The air tasted metallic. The emblem pulsed once, twice, and then sank into the display like ink drawn into paper. My wrist burned, a hot needling flare that made me hiss. I pulled back my sleeve. For the briefest heartbeat, the faintest echo of that same emblem glowed under my skin, as if my veins had learned a new language and were practicing the alphabet. Then it was gone. I stared at the ghost of it, the hoodie damp on my shoulders, the storm eating Manhattan pane by pane. Okay, I whispered to the symbol that wasn't there anymore. Let's see what you're selling. The coordinates came dressed like an invitation and felt like a dare. 92nd floor, glass tower that wore the storm like jewelry. The elevator had no buttons, just a single black pane that read my pulse, and decided I was interesting enough to ascend. By the time the doors hushed open, the rain had turned the city into a neon anatomy chart. Arteries of traffic. Capillaries of light. The heart a pulsing billboard that sold redemption 5 seconds at a time. The penthouse spread itself around the view as if the room were an afterthought. Minimalist. Expensive. A museum curated by someone who never touched anything. He stood by the window like he'd been poured there, tall, immaculate. A suit that made the darkness look underdressed. His eyes, when he turned, were the molten gold of traffic lights deciding you were already too late. Ms. Morgan, he said, voice smooth as a settlement. Thank you for accepting on such short notice. And miss the chance to meet my stalker? I stepped in, water ticking off my hoodie onto the white lacquer floor. Tragic. Rhea, he corrected, almost gently. We already know one another. It would be disingenuous to pretend otherwise. The smile didn't reach his eyes, but it warmed the air by a fraction. Close up, he looked like a secret that practiced being seen. Aristocratic bones, mouth calibrated to polite cruelty. He gestured to an obsidian coffee table where a single porcelain cup steamed. The smell found me first. Espresso, he said. Ethiopian yirgachefe. You take 2 sugars, and pretend you don't. An unwelcome heat went up my neck. You broke into my life and learned caffeine trivia. That's horrifying. He tilted his head, amused. Horrifying would be the security questions you reuse. Your first dog's name should not still open an offshore account, Rhea. Your parents' new address is tasteful, by the way, though your mother hates the neighbor's hydrangeas. She texts your father about it at 3 a.m., and he pretends to be asleep. My spine, which had been performing courage in front of the glass, went cold. Say my social and get it over with. He didn't. Instead, he motioned at the city. This is the polite mask. The market you worked in. The rules that made you rich and bored. I asked you up here to speak about the other market. The one in the basement of hell, I said. I got the brochure. Not a basement, he corrected. Grave as a professor. A layer. Interleaved with this one. If you're going to damn something, be precise. Is this where you tell me you're a demon? I walked closer because he had the kind of gravity you only notice when you've already lost a step. Or should I infer it from the interior design? He laughed then, a brief shaped thing, and the penthouse shifted as if sound itself were a design element. I don't tell, I offer. He extended a hand. Astar. I didn't take it. Of course it's a short name. Good branding. Is there an umlaut somewhere? If you like. He let the hand fall without offense. I prefer contracts to confessions. It's algebra for the soul. Cute, I said. You have a brochure for that too? He nodded toward the table. Next to the espresso was a black slab. Not quite a tablet, not quite a relic. Lines of code braided across it like veins under skin. They moved when I looked. Sit, he said. I stand better. Then stand. You only need your eyes. His tone made the word need work over time. I'll give you access to the real market. The one where greed isn't a flaw, but a fuel. The sentence rang in me like a coin spun in a bowl. You're offering me... what? A Bloomberg terminal that bites back? Liquidity, leverage, probability tuned to your hand, rooms behind the rooms you already know. He watched my face as if it were a graph. I don't kill, Rhea. I invest. In appetites. In patterns. I feed on the delta between who they are and what they want. Charming. I folded my arms to keep my hands from reaching for the not tablet. So you're a venture capitalist with literal fangs. No fangs? He said, almost affronted. I consider them gauche. And what do you feed on in me exactly? His gaze was impolite for a heartbeat. Then it gentled. Not greed, surprisingly. Precision. You starved yourself on control until you mistook it for safety. It was working, I said. Until it wasn't. We let the city talk for a moment. The rain glittered like a million small bribes. Somewhere far below, a siren stitched the night back together. Why me? I asked. If you're the devil's broker? I gestured at the room's perfect edges. Surely. Your Rolodex includes men who can buy small countries without blinking. I've collected plenty of those. He looked bored, which was worse than predatory. They lack texture. Besides, your fall is aesthetically pleasing. You were wronged in a way that highlights the hypocrisy of the system. I do like a story with moral architecture. I'm not your ornament, I said. No, you're my partner, he said, as if that weren't a word people needed to earn. If you want to be. My laugh sounded like it belonged to a woman with smeared mascara. On what terms? A soul tithe? 12 payments of $19.99 and my firstborn? He lifted a shoulder. We can include an NDA, if that comforts you. The NDA for my soul? I blinked. What does it cover? Hellfire? Post-termination hauntings? The part where you repossess my sense of humor if I breach? It would be unfortunate to lose that, he said. But yes. Confidentiality. Your usual retainer, except permanent and far less optional. I love a permanent optional, I said. Is there a trial period? There's always a trial, he said softly, and for a second the word didn't mean demo. It meant ordeal. I walked to the glass, watching the river smear itself into mercury. The storm had put lipstick on the skyline and called it apocalypse. Gold eyes reflected in the window beside mine, and for a heartbeat, we looked like a couple in a cologne ad for doom. What happens if I say no? I asked. Likelihoods continue unchanged. Astar's voice put a pin through inevitability. You become a cautionary headline. Eli gets promoted by the demon who rented his spine. Duncan Hale rises another rung on a ladder made of bleeding hands. Your parents worry about hydrangeas, and never ask why their daughter stops calling. And if I say yes, you stop asking what happens to you, he said. You decide. I let the silence wear through us. My heartbeat had learned a new tempo. Not fast exactly, but decisive. The room smelled of espresso and rain, and something I couldn't name that tasted like a metal I'd never licked. On my terms, I said finally. I don't sign anything I don't edit. Astar inclined his head, as if we were at a gala. Of course. No fine print that enslaves me through a pronoun. No clauses that make me collateral. We build, we don't own. Equity split? He asked, amused. 50-50, I said, and the word felt like a knife I'd kept in a boot since childhood. Scandalous. His eyes warmed. Come see. I approached the black slab. Up close, the code lines were more alive. Strands of light weaving in and out of a language that looked like math learning to sing. He set his hand a centimeter above the surface, and the room shifted. The temperature dropped by a performative degree. The lights dimmed as if someone drew a veil. My skin prickled. Breathe, he said. I am. Breathe. Like you're about to jump. He didn't touch me, but my wrist flared with the memory of the emblem from the co-working pod. A phantom sun under the skin. The slab brightened, and the walls, God help me, responded. Screens that had been part of the decor woke like sympathetic eyes. The chandelier above us fractured its own light into 5 razor points, a geometry that traced itself into a pentagram on the polished floor. Elegant as a sculpture. Subtle, I said, because if I didn't, I'd say impossible and mean yes. Think of it as a handshake. Astar murmured. Words appeared on the slab. No, not words. Variables, nested conditions. A contract that looked like it could model weather patterns and human error with equal grace. My throat tightened. This is code, I said, reverent despite myself. Contracts always were, he said. We used blood when signatures were rare. Gross, I said, and my hand hovered. He watched me like a man watching a tide he'd invited. Rhea. Your conditions? I told him. I spoke like I typed when the world was on fire. Clean, unforgiving lines. Sovereignty, mutual disclosure, exit rights that didn't require death. Protections for my family that looked mundane on paper and monstrous in effect. He listened without interrupting, and the slab transformed with each clause, accepting, locking, burning our language into architecture. When I finished, the contract looked fair, not safe. Fair. Astar touched the corner of the slab. One last requirement, he said. Of course there is. You don't lie to me, he said. Not by omission. Not by timing. Not by the shape you make around the truth. I can tolerate betrayal, I cannot eat it. I could have asked 100 questions about what demons find palatable. Instead, I said, same. His mouth curved. Same. He extended his hand again. This time, I took it. The room exhaled. The chandelier's points brightened until they were the raw white of hospital lights, and then bent, arcing down to kiss the slab. The pentagram rippled, as if cut from water. Air pressed against my eardrums. Every screen in the penthouse woke at once, a galaxy of glass flickering with our names, our clauses, the math of us. Heat struck my wrist, sharp, needle clean, radiating outward like a star learning itself. I hissed through my teeth and didn't pull away. On my skin, gold rose like a bruise in reverse, the ring, the sigil, the currency coil aligning. For a second, 3 heartbeats, 6. I could see it not as ornament but as function, tiny variables rotating under the surface, a lock picking itself from the inside. When the glow faded, a faint afterimage remained, a blush of geometry only visible if I looked sideways. "Congratulations," Astar said softly. "You've just signed an NDA with hell. Do I get a tote bag?" I flexed my fingers. The ache faded into a warmth that felt a lot like hunger. "What now?" "Now," he said, "and the windows dim to put the city in our hands. We test the market." Somewhere behind us, a door that had not existed opened with the discretion of old money. A woman stepped through carrying a tablet and a gaze that could sterilize. She was elegant in the way knives are elegant, precise, reflective, very good at their job. "Mira," Astar said, without looking away from me. "Rhea." "Rhea, Mira. An honor," Mira said. Her tone suggested the honor had been misdelivered. Her eyes, green as minted bills, scanned me once, head to bootlaces, and filed the data under temporary asset. "Your schedule," she said to Astar, offering the tablet. "The Hale meeting has moved. The ward matter is—" She flicked a curt glance at me. "Developing." My jaw tightened. "You always announce people's betrayals like the weather?" "Only when they dress for it," she said, and smiled with no teeth. "Play nice," Astar said mildly. "I always do," Mira said. Then to me, "Welcome to the firm." It sounded like condolences. When she left, the door resealed into wall, obedient architecture pretending not to have witnessed anything. Astar considered me with that economist calm, as if calculating a derivative of my future. "Shall we begin?" I let my palm hover above the slab. My wrist hummed where the sigil slept. The penthouse's many eyes waited. "Let's make the real market say our names," I said. He smiled. Not nicely. Outside, the rain changed tempo, as if the city had decided to keep time with us. We didn't so much begin as rewire. Astar's penthouse had grown teeth, screens like constellations, tables that woke to touch, a living chandelier that adjusted its light to my pulse. We set up a command ring in the main room, and another in a server bay that looked like a chapel built for machines, corridors of black racks exhaling cool breath, blue LEDs blinking like altar candles. On the glass, the city sulked and glittered. Inside the glass, our new market breathed. "Index spread?" I asked. "Hungry," Astar said. Which should not have been a metric and yet told me everything. We ran our first play in silence, a set of micro-latency nudges that made a certain derivative look less haunted. I laid the scaffolding, orders split into decimal ghosts, timing shaved into threads finer than hair. Astar stood at my shoulder and did something I couldn't name. The probability inside the numbers softened. Resistance in the system lowered its chin and let us pass. It felt like finding the grain in a piece of wood and pushing with it instead of against. Charts climbed, not greedily, but like plants when you remember to open the blinds. "Do you ever sleep?" I asked, eyes on the ribbon of code. "Only during recessions," he said. And I heard the smile even if I didn't see it. We took turns, being the scalpel. I'd pull liquidity from a place that didn't deserve it. He'd tilt attention. Which is to say, he made every investor's hand itch at once. A pocket of crypto woke and wagged its tail. A bloated fund tripped over its own leverage. On the quantum field edges where math turns social, he breathed. And the social obliged. It shouldn't have been intoxicating. It was. Mira haunted doorways like a well-tailored conscience. She brought reports on Hale's movements, Ward's digital footprints, compliance memos, written in legal that translated to "We see you, we just can't prove it yet." When she handed me a tablet, her manicure flashed like a warning. "You're efficient," I told her because it was true. "It's good to be good at one's job," she said, which sounded like a threat. Only because of how efficiently she made it not sound like a threat. By the third night, the music in the penthouse, quiet, expensive, more atmosphere than melody, had syncopated with the click of my keyboard. The wrist sigil Astar and I shared slept under my skin like a coin under a napkin, present, weighty, pretending not to be vulgar. Breath, he would say, when my shoulders climbed my neck. You hold it like collateral. And you never do? I said, fingers dancing. You inhale entire economies. Only on a full moon, he said mildly. We pushed a set of coordinated trades across exchanges that shouldn't have cooperated, and did. The resulting price action rolled through the charts like a clean wave. Investors who had never met each other made the same decision separately and congratulated themselves on their instincts. We sold into their applause. Don't look like that, Astar said, too gently. Like what? Like you've been starving for so long you forgot how to chew. I remember, I said. But my voice betrayed me. He didn't reply. His hand hovered next to mine as if to steady the air. I didn't move away. The heat from his skin was a shade of temperature missing from thermostat dials. By midnight, the room had forgotten the storm and found its own weather. Data fell in bright strings. The chandelier threw geometry against the floor that made strangers in the carpet. We lifted one coin I'd always distrusted. The kind with a founder who loved microphones. We shorted a fund whose mandate read like a poem and performed like a farce. We placed tiny bets where grief had made a market irrational, and they paid not. Because grief is weak, but because it is human, and humans prefer symmetry. If a charity was labeled virtuous, it was owed a correction or a crown. We delivered both, depending on the line. Between executions, we bantered because silence would have been surrender. Your left eyebrow telegraphs before you sell, he said, amused. Your right hand telegraphs that you don't have a heartbeat, I said. It's outsourced. Onshore or offshore. Preferential tax treatment, he said. And we didn't look at each other, we didn't have to. The first error arrived like a drop of ink in water. Nothing. Then, everything. My console flinched. A task that had no reason to fail threw a red flag, and then a second one for company. I drilled into the log, and felt my mouth go dry in that too clean way, the way a hospital tastes. The error message wasn't standard. It was composed, auth, hook, granted ghost, trace, cleared, note, EW. The room narrowed to a filament. I paged backward, then sideways, then into a corner of the system that shouldn't have had corners. The signature threaded through like a hair in soup, hard to see, impossible to unsee once you did. He hadn't learned to hide better. He'd learned I would always look. Astar's hand ghosted closer to the desk. Problem. I said nothing. I didn't want to give the syllables oxygen. It's cute, he added softly, like we were admiring a stain. Mira appeared with a cup of coffee that had the nerve to smell perfect. Update on Hale. He moved the meeting again, this time with a +1 whose calendar is a solid black object. Either they're very important, or very unimportant, or not human. Useful, I said, still reading. My wrist prickled. The sigil woke like a cat disturbed. Her eyes slid to the screen. She took in the code, the error, and my face in one glance. Maybe it's time to remove the human element, she said, sweet as a blade. I didn't look up. Which one of us would you like to start with? I wasn't thinking of plural, she said. Her smile touched nothing except the shape it wore. Mira, Astar said softly, which was somehow sharper than a shout. Of course. She placed the coffee at the edge of my vision. I'll check the exterior perimeter. There's an anomaly in the elevators. When she was gone, the air warmed by a degree. I watched Ew slip between our defenses, like he'd been given a map. Eli, I said, in case Astar had missed that I could still say the name without swallowing glass. Yes, Astar agreed. He's clumsy, or arrogant. Both, I said, leaning closer. The script left by his intrusion wasn't just access. It was commentary. A note here. a variable named after an in-joke from our first year running a desk together. When we still believed genius would protect us from everything but sleep deprivation, he was showing me he could still speak our dialect. My wrist burned. I pulled the sleeve back. The gold had climbed out of dormancy, and now glowed, pale but present, as if some part of Astar's system was routing power through me. "Does that mean I'm angry, or you're hungry?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the code. "Correlation," he said, "not causation." Comforting. I followed Eli's track to the edge of a sandbox I'd built earlier as a sting. One that looked like a cache of client keys but was actually a snare. He'd skirted it with insulting grace. He had help. The permissions he used bore the texture of someone inside our walls. "Someone is opening doors," I said. "Or leaving them unlocked," Astar said. He didn't have to add on purpose. I spun a trace that didn't look like a trace. For a minute, the console hummed like a contented animal. Then the hum turned thin. A script resisted me, and that script had my touch all over it, which should have been impossible because I hadn't written it. Eli had. I remembered writing the template years ago. A teaching toy, a proof of concept. I had never deployed it. I had never shared it. "You took my bones again," I said under my breath, and the sigil on my wrist flared, gold as warning tape. Astar finally touched me. Not my skin, just the chair back. The gesture steadied the world anyway. "Rhea." "I know." I breathed. Counted. The chandelier's geometry slowed. The blue LEDs in the server bay returned to their regular prayers. We pivoted. I threaded quarantines between the trades, so nothing froze conspicuously. Astar sank the weight of his attention into the parts of the market we weren't touching, producing noise to cover our signal. Somewhere in the city, 3 headlines pivoted to something shinier. Somewhere else, an analyst took a day off. The world, obligingly, looked away. "Ward doesn't have this kind of access by accident," I said. "He's not that brave. Bravery is rarely involved," Astar said. "Hunger, mostly." "You would know," I said. "So would you," he said. And it wasn't unkind. We ran a purge on a crawlspace even I had forgotten I'd built. Eli had a hand in it, but not both. His permissions reached across a gap he couldn't cross alone. The gap was labeled, "Ha," for internal use. The handwriting there was precise, immaculate, a little cruel. Mira's. I didn't say the name. Not yet. Suspicion is a match. You don't strike it until you're sure you're not standing in gas. The screen pulsed. A note blinked and disappeared, 2 frames long like a message mouthed behind glass. I caught only the first word. "Hi." "Infuriating," I said. "Adorable," Astar countered. But his voice had cooled. We finished the night without fireworks. In our corner of the market, the lines straightened, then climbed. Somewhere else, a fund we disliked found a banana peel. We shut down the ring at 3 a.m., which is when even New York confesses fatigue. I stood, joints crackling. The penthouse had dimmed to its low heartbeat. The city beyond the glass had softened from neon to bruise. "Take the couch," Astar said, indicating a leather expanse that looked like it had eaten smaller sofas. "I have an apartment," I said. "You also have 6 officers who would enjoy your autograph." "Flattering," I said, and didn't move. He angled his head. "Rhea, you are very good at pretending you repair alone." "You're very good at pretending you don't care," I said. "Practice," he said. I let my hand rest on the desk. The sigil dimmed to the memory of heat. In the reflection on the glass, our shapes looked almost domestic. 2 figures whose shadows overlapped into a third. "We have an intruder with my old fingerprints," I said. "And a hostess who doesn't like sharing her table," he said. "Don't say her name," I told him, surprising us both. He didn't. "We'll flush him. We'll feed her a piece she can't resist, and watch which teeth she uses." I exhaled. In the server bay, the blue LEDs kept their vigil. In the night sky, our market rotated, obedient and hungry. Tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow, he agreed. When I finally lay down on the offendingly expensive couch, I stared at the ceiling until the chandelier blurred into a constellation. My wrist ached in a way that had nothing to do with tendons. Somewhere inside the code I'd built, and the code I'd become, a note kept repeating. EW. I turned my hand so the mark didn't glow into the room and tell on me. The air tasted like espresso and cold metal. I let the ache and the anger braid until they made rope. I would use it for climbing or strangling, maybe both. From the dark, Astar's voice, soft enough to be a thought, sleep. Only during recessions, I said, and the couch, obligingly, didn't laugh. The server room was a cathedral that believed in glass instead of God. At night it hummed in a single cold note, aisles of black racks breathing, measured air, cables braided like veins in a transparent body. The floor was raised, the ceiling low, the feeling somewhere between airport and sanctum. Through a slit of reinforced window, the city stormed, rain scissoring neon into ribbons, the river chewing light. Lightning stitched itself to a nearby spire and lingered, as if reluctant to leave. I stood in the aisle's blue twilight, pulse synced to the LEDs. The mark at my wrist had been quiet all evening. Now it warmed, like metal learning a memory. "Show me," I whispered, and the nearest wall complied, skinning itself into a dashboard only I could call. Mira's trail was an elegance of omissions. She hadn't walked through our security, she'd arranged it so the doors did not apply to her. On paper, she didn't exist in the hours she was busiest. In logs, she was a polite echo. People who bury things professionally forget how much they reveal in the way they bury. Eli's signature, ew, braided through her omissions, like thread through a hem. I traced her route to a partition we called the lake, a storage pool that looked innocuous and bored. If you didn't know what you were touching, you'd call it a cache for staging legal uploads, and never notice the shadow lake beneath, the one where we cooled the hottest data. She'd learned the temperature of our sins. Static whispered down the aisle, not mechanical, aware. I didn't turn immediately. Predators love recognition. I scrolled once more, marked 3 points with a virtual pin, and only then faced the aisle's mouth. Mira could have been cut from the server room's reflection, sharp, clean, nothing wasted. Black sheath dress, hair pinned with architectural malice, heels that would have made quieter choices. She carried a tablet at her side like a weapon she wanted you to underestimate. "Working late," she said mildly. "Couldn't sleep." I nodded at the racks. "They don't snore." She came closer, the lights sketching her cheekbones into decisions. "You're very attached to the idea that you keep this place running. It's charming. And you're very attached to the idea that I'm temporary." I smiled without showing teeth. "It's lazy." The servers exhaled. Through the window slit, Thunder put a hand on the tower and pressed. Mira stopped a yard away, close enough to catalog, far enough to strike without getting her shoes dirty. "I admire the speed with which you learn to love our tools," she said. "I admire the speed with which you forgot who handed you the toolbox." "Funny," I said. "I thought I forged half of these on the fly. I must be terrible at gratitude." Her eyes were domestic cat calm, her mouth wasn't. "You're a temporary asset. He'll discard you like the rest. At least I know I'm not for sale anymore." I rotated my wrist deliberately, so the faint geometry glimmered under my skin. "That's an upgrade from the last firm." For the first time, something in her face moved. "Cute trick," she said softly. "You would know," I said, turning the dashboard so she could see her own omissions reflected back. "Your handwriting is immaculate." She didn't bother to deny. "Do you want to know how we talk about you? In the other rooms? They say you do precision like it's a religion. They say you think control is love. You think that if you turn the right screw in the right order, no one bleeds. He finds that novel. He? I said. And the question tasted like a test I'd already passed. You like Astar? She said it like an expensive joke. He used to choose older names. He's practicing mercy. Mercy is not what I'd call this week. That's because you confuse partnership with possession, she said. He doesn't. He collects glass figurines? I asked, glancing at the walls. People. Her smile sharpened. Monsters. The air changed. The dashboard stuttered. The lakeshore, our decoy layer over the shadow pool, flickered like a fish at the surface. Mira's tablet brightened, a line of text knitting itself across the glass. Open black, lake.sub. She didn't touch it. The code leapt anyway. Don't, I said, already moving. Do, she said, and the server room swallowed. It wasn't light. It was the opposite of light, the way a negative burns its shape into your eyes. Black code poured into the lake like ink in a baptismal font, then convulsed. The temperature dropped, my breath went white on the air. The racks buzzed as if trying to reverse prayer. A pressure built at the base of my skull as the data shaped itself into a single directive. Hollow. And the room obeyed. Cute, I said through my teeth, my hands already building quarantines like sandbags. Weaponized null. Your precision makes such tidy graves, Mira said, swiping her tablet once. The black code bucked and surged. An aisle away, a breaker popped, the sound small and obscene. From the window, a finger of lightning sprayed static along the glass as if licking for entry. The sigil at my wrist flared bright, as if tasting the threat. Power skated across my skin, my vision sharpening to needlepoint. I cut the lake in half, then into quarters, then into ice cubes, quarantines. Nesting inside quarantines like matryoshkas of refusal. The black code slammed those walls and reverberated, looking for a seam. Rhea. My name was a clarity, flat and low. Astar didn't enter so much as manifest between frames, the way a figure materializes when you blink and rethink faith. The gold in his eyes was molten and impolite. The server's hum pitched up as if an orchestra had recognized its conductor and gotten shy about it. You're early, Mira said. She managed cool, she had rehearsed it. We weren't expecting. You miscounted, he said, and did not look at her. I felt him before I saw him feel me. A pressure like a hand under my ribs, steadying. The black code threw itself at our ice and cracked its own edges. It wasn't human spite, it was ravenous math. She's been ferrying, I said, fingers still moving. Ward rides her back. He knows our handshakes. He knows my old tricks. He left a high in the carpet just to be horribly Eli about it. Mira's lips thinned. He's useful. He knows how to be grateful. That's why you taught him my signatures? I asked. Or was that Duncan's idea? At the name, her jaw flickered. Astar finally slid his gaze to Mira. It was not cruel. Cruelty is the poor man's efficiency. It was evaluative. I had never been so glad not to be the subject of a look. Close it, he told her. Why would I? She asked, mild. It was almost awe-inspiring. The commitment. Because, he said, and finally something old lifted inside his voice. I am asking you. The black code surged. It had been growing teeth while we argued. It hit the lake's spine, and the server room made a sound like a building swallowing its tongue. My hands weren't enough. The quarantines held and bled. Mira moved first, not to help, but to push. Her fingers brushed her tablet. The black flashed to white and back. A pulse. The room's lights inverted. For a half second, the world looked like a film negative. My bones under my skin, the racks as skeletons of themselves. Astar a silhouette with golden eyes that hurt to see. He stepped between me and the blow. The energy hit him. Not like electricity, but like a verdict. A wave of null trying to declare him unmade. It met the shape of him and shrieked. Light slammed his veins, gold burning outward, tracing lines along his hands, up his forearms, into his throat. He tilted his head and let it pour through him, like a pipe venting hell back into itself. The floor shivered and was still. The black code stuttered. For a moment, it seemed to consider self-respect. Then the quarantines tightened and crushed. Silence returned, the way a stagehand returns, fast, embarrassed, forgetting to breathe. I realized I'd been holding mine, and let it go. My wrist burned. The sigil had lit like a brand. Astar's eyes dimmed from weapon to instrument. Mira's tablet dropped an inch. That was her version of shock. You shouldn't be able to do math? Astar said, even. I am math. Her expression emptied. I did what you trained me to do. You misunderstood the lesson, he said. It wasn't angry. That made it worse. The window slit flashed with another lightning stitch. The storm had come closer, or we had risen into it. City lights wobbled on the glass. Somewhere below, a siren committed to its bit. Mira recovered her mask in a heartbeat. Then fire me. Later, he said. Her eyes cut to me. The expression in them was not apology. It was calculation adjusted by pain. Be careful, she said softly, like a curse. What you think makes you chosen. She walked out with her chin at a perfect height. The servers murmured behind her. The door closed itself as if grateful to have a job. I didn't realize I was shaking until I went to push hair off my forehead and hit air 3 inches short. Astar caught my wrist, not hard, just enough. Not now, he said. Not what? Not collapse. He looked at my hand like it was a message he could read. The gold under my skin cooled under his palm. I hated that it felt like relief. I had her, I said, because pride is its own narcotic. I would have boxed it without you. You would have, he agreed. And you would have been hurt. I have a distaste for that outcome. Because it hurts your return, I said. Because if I said anything else the ground would tilt. Because it hurts you, he said, and didn't blink. We stood in the server room's afterglow, ozone and restraint, until the hum gentled. The sigil dimmed. The storm breathed. No one came to clap. The penthouse looked like a photograph of itself, precise, cooled, not interested in our insides. I poured whiskey with a hand that had decided to audition for tremors. The bottle made a private sound against crystal. I liked that the sound didn't care about us. Astar stayed a pace away, as if crowding would cause a second accident. The gold had retreated from his veins, but not entirely. It lingered in the small webbing between thumb and forefinger, like the blush of a remembered fever. I set the glass down, reached into the wall safe behind the credenza, and took out a gun I hated for its practicality. I didn't point it at him. I didn't have to. One click, I said, and the barrel gleamed like a thesis. And you're just a myth again. Then make it count, he said softly. We looked at each other across a very old problem. The storm lit us in frames. His shirt collar was open, had it been? And the line of his throat held a pulse that refused metaphor. My wrist, traitor, glowed like a coal under skin. You knew, I said, about Eli. About Mira. About Hale. You knew, and you let me stand in the lake and debate thermodynamics with a bomb. The words were precise because the alternatives were mess. He listened with the stillness of a reserve you don't lend. I knew probabilities, he said. I wanted data. You wanted to see if I would break where you did, I said. There's your data. He didn't flinch. I wanted to see if you would insist on terms, even while drowning. I always insist on terms, I said. Ask anyone who's tried to date me. A corner of his mouth considered humor and then declined. The room narrowed to 3 variables: the gun, the glass, the man with a galaxy behind his eyes. I took a breath. That hurt. You don't own me. I never tried to, he said. You trained her to be like you. My voice was steady now. She became like you, in all the ways you forget to measure. He looked at the window, at the city he wore like a coat. We can fire her, he said, which was a sentence and a mercy, and not enough. I raised the gun an inch. The whiskey in my other hand made a small halo on the table. I could erase your accounts. Not just here, below. Fold your signatures into noise. You'd be a rumor with good tailoring. Then do it, he said. No challenge, no dare. Just the room waiting to see who I was. The storm leaned close, eager. The mark on my wrist pulsed once, not as a warning but as a question. I stared at the gun long enough to imagine both outcomes and despise one. My finger found the natural resistance on the trigger and eased off. I don't do cleanup murders, I said, and set the weapon down. We were still. The city played movies on the glass, red, white, the occasional green. The chandelier threw geometry across the floor like a complication I no longer wanted to solve. Rhea, he said, and my name in his mouth was an admission, not a manipulation. I turned, and he was closer than ethics. His eyes had come down from weapon to instrument, to something I refused to name. The gold under his skin brightened, not with violence but with voltage. The soft kind that makes hair rise. He didn't touch me first. I hate when stories lie about that. I took a step that erased a rule I'd been using as a ladder, put my hand on his shirt above the stubborn pulse, and found my own. The kiss was not conquest. It was surrender from both sides, rare and ungraceful. He tasted like smoke, and something older than recipes. His mouth softened, as if he remembered, with me, that not all contracts require witnesses. The storm threw our reflections across the glass, an overlay of two people who had been collecting each other's edges for weeks, and were suddenly not interested in inventory. When we parted, the gold in his veins dimmed to ember. My wristmark cooled to a blush. The whiskey's halo on the table had grown and found the edge. We watched it claim the lip and fall. Tomorrow, he said, low. Tomorrow, I echoed, and set my forehead against his for a second, like we were both measuring the same distance. Outside, the city kept burning. Inside, for a fraction of a minute, I allowed myself the heresy of feeling safe. Morning came in grayscale and thunderheads, and then didn't bother finishing the sentence. The storm planted itself over the tower like a siege engine. Somewhere below, the city pretended at routines, umbrellas, taxis, the defiant steam of street carts. Up here, the air had the metallic taste of a coin on the tongue. We spent the first hours triaging, patching the lake, shoring the quarantines, rerouting anything that could be turned against us. It felt like bailing water with a silver bowl. Astar worked with that unruffled economy of movement that made you wonder, if he breathed, or simply borrowed air and returned, it improved. Ward will try again, I said, eyes on the console. He's not clever enough to leave after a partial. He has encouragement, Astar said, which was polite for Mira is not done. I didn't ask the next question. There was only one answer, and I wasn't sure which version would bruise less. By noon, the power hiccuped. A strip of the penthouse went dark, then reconsidered. The chandelier flickered in sympathy and then chose loyalty. Sirens sewed the city tighter. My wrist mark had been good all morning. Now it woke like a warning. The skin above it felt warmer, the geometry more present, as if a second pulse had come to lodge under my own. Rhea, Astar said, gentle. Eat. I had coffee. That is not food, he said with the patience of 1,000-year-old disappointment, and set a plate near my hand. I looked at the croissant like it was a dare, tore a corner off and chewed on the idea of normal. If you had wanted normal, you should have signed a hedge fund. I did, he said. They bored me. The screen blinked. A line of code slid across my field, then stuttered like a cyclist who'd hit oil. I followed it to a node we rarely used. A tiny relay I'd left asleep in a shaft. of architecture we never visited, because it didn't lead to anything human. The access flag fluttered, then pinned itself down. Duncan Hale, auth confirmed. The name stamped itself with the quiet arrogance of old money. Speak of the rot, I said. Hale just shook hands with a ghost. Not a ghost, Astar said. He didn't look surprised. He's been auditioning. For whom? The answer walked into the room, in the shape of a name none of the screens printed, but all of them implied. The probabilities around Hale shifted like a school of fish, making way for a shark. The metadata took on a sheen I recognized from the coarser parts of our world. A demon, not like Astar, older in ways that turned the air colder, less invested in contracts than in the mess after. He's made a deal, I said. Yes. You knew he would. I knew he wanted to. You wanted to see it, I said, soft by accident. How far he'd go. His silence was not an admission, which is the form of admission men like him prefer. The floor shivered. The building's way of clearing its throat. A system message marched across the glass. Exterior drones. Unauthorized objects approaching. Mira's voice arrived over the intercom, with the false intimacy of a phone call that believes it used to be a secret. Rhea, she said, as if we were in the same room and had simply chosen different chairs. Let's close your position. I took the pistol from the safe because pragmatism, like grief, is best acknowledged early. Roof, Astar said. Server bay, I countered, already moving. If they cut us here, the roof is a stage, then a stage, he said. And we ran like we'd rehearsed it. The server bay's air was strung tight. Something had crawled through the vents and learned our light. A bank of racks had been opened as neatly as a ribcage, cables spilled like intestines. The lake sat in its quiet metal, pretending nothing had happened to it yesterday. The window slit blinked rain down its face as if trying to read us. I hit the manual lockdown, steel teeth bit the doors. Astar stood in the aisle like a statute of jurisdiction. Centered, infuriating. An argument with good tailoring. The first drone appeared against the window. Sleek, matte, unfriendly. And then 3 more. Their red lights skated over the glass like insects too proud to bother with the lamp. The glass lilted. Bulletproof, I said. Until bullets learn accountants. They did, Astar said dryly. Years ago, the first shots were discreet, expensive. The pane muttered cracks, like a quietly offended host. I rolled under the nearest rack and put 2 rounds into the first drone's underbelly, sheer habit guiding my hands. It spun once with wounded dignity, clipped a second, then died into the rain. Charming, Mira said somewhere in the walls. You kept the human toys. Bring me something worth my tuition, I said, and stood. Lightning used the next building for a harp. The server room flickered to negative. The quick white of bones, the gold veins in Astar's wrists, ghost-lit under skin. Then the world went bright again, and the drones decided we had introduced ourselves enough. They broke the glass in 5 cuts. Wind shouldered into the bay like a drunk cousin at a wedding. Rain came in sideways, flinging itself against the racks, the floor, my face. The smell of wet circuits is an entire career ending in one breath. I threw a tarp over the nearest open section, and shot the second drone in the eye. Mira stepped through the gap in the glass, as if she were just cutting in for a dance. Her hair didn't move. Her dress looked like it had been asked for its opinion. In her hand was no gun, just a tablet, which as we had learned, was worse. Don't, Astar said. Always, she replied. And the tablet sang. Black code spilled into the room, like an argument we'd already had. It leapt from the device into the racks, then arced, becoming a rope of intention. I saw the command before it wrote itself. Erase, Rhea. Unoriginal, I said, and the mark at my wrist heated like a brazier. The rope struck, invisible, and left fingerprints, and a rack at the far edge of the room went to its knees. Data popped like grease. I moved without thinking, sliding into the code to give it bad choices. Quarantines rose and fell, the lake bleated. Astar stepped in front of me, hand raised, and took the next strike. This time, it wasn't null, it was fire that had learned math. It licked the air and found the shape of him, poured itself against his chest, as if tasting for doors. His eyes went the particular gold you only see in paintings that watch you as you move. The air warped, the rain slowed, and then I saw it. Not a wing, not feathers, not bone, but a plane of light extruding from his shoulder, unfurling between us and the room. It looked like a contract written in a language older than paper, and taught to behave like armor. The edge of it hissed where rain touched. The drones reconsidered physics, and backed up half a foot. Mira's face was a kind of grief I hadn't seen on her. "This is not for her," she said. "It is," Astar said, without looking away from the code. "You taught me that." She moved then. Not toward me, toward the lake. Her tablet wrote a door only she could see. Data inside the metal flinched and offered a throat. "No," I said, and the word came from somewhere lower than voice. The sigil on my wrist flared, and I pushed. I don't know what, even now. Not power like the movies sell you. No lightning from fingers, no choir. Just a certainty that felt like a lever in a place I had not known contained levers. The quarantines obeyed me, the way a body obeys when it wants to live. The door Mira had written hiccuped. The code rope bucked in her hand like a startled horse. She looked at me then, actually looked. The professional sheen gone. "He gave you too much," she said softly. "He always does." Or, "I took it," I said, and put another round into a drone because a girl can multitask. Something outside howled. A wind, or the demon hail had purchased making an entrance through the weather. The pressure in the room changed, my ears popped. Somewhere far below, alarms found each other and made a chorus. Astar's shield, wing, plane of light, shivered and held, but when he turned to catch the next strike, the gold bled out of the lines like a nosebleed. It didn't vanish, it diminished. "Astar," I warned. He ignored the warning like a habit. Another lash of code came from my face. The shield took it. I felt the impact as a flare under my skin, as if we shared a wire. He exhaled through his teeth. The sound was not pain. It was a ledger entry. "You wanted to see how far I'd go," I said, as much to him as to whatever in the storm had begun to feed. "Congratulations. I've reached hell." "You're late," Mira said, and threw the next command. The racks behind me screamed. The smell was sugar and burning, sweet and wrong. I fired twice blind, and hit a drone that was too proud to duck. It spun into the window frame, and died with dignity. Rain made a mess of its funeral. Then, the new presence arrived. You couldn't see it. You could only feel the room get cheaper. The probability around every action dropped its standards. Good taste left. The lights worked less well, not because of power, but because shame had taken a break. "Duncan," I said, and the name tasted like dust. "Your +1 is a disappointment." A laugh rolled through the vents like a hand on silk. I didn't recognize the voice, but my bones did. It was the sound money makes when it stops trying to look like anything else. "Take her," Mira said into the air, and for the first time there was something like heat in her voice. "Bill later." The voice returned, amused. What hit us wasn't code. It was pressure from a bad idea, caused by a worse intention. Astar caught it. He always did. The shield held, then shuddered. The gold in his veins blew out like candles. He staggered one step, and then another, and for a heartbeat the room contained a man. Not a myth, not math. Breathing hard and entirely fallible. I moved without asking permission of anything except my body. The pistol went back in the waistband. My hands went to the console, not for code this time, but for fire. I pulled a pocket of test data I kept like a temper and lit it. Fed it oxygen, let it bloom. It wasn't black or gold. It was neon. The color of open signs and bad tattoos and nights that change you. It ran through the racks like a rumor and came out hotter. When it hit the demon's pressure, it sang. New toy? Astar said, breathless. Almost human. Old one, I said. I just never had the right kindling. Mira recovered first. She scorched the room with a look that belonged on a campaign poster for regret and raised her tablet. Ready to carve us into useful pieces. I threw the neon fire at her code. It met the black. Her black, Ward's black, Hale's cheapness. And the two colors fought like abstract art in a divorce. The roof door blew inward. Wind shoved us. The stairwell gaped like a throat. I saw sky. A bruise, lightning veining it. Rain doing its excellent impression of nails. I ran. On the roof. The storm was bigger than morality. The drones that survived skittered along the parapet like cockroaches dressed for a gala. The city looked like a motherboard we were about to short. I could feel the other demon here, not embodied but present, arrogance pressed into humidity. Mira followed with efficient rage. Astar came after, slower than pride. The wing had gone. I could still see the echo of its shape in the way the rain bent around him. He looked wrong to my eyes, like a statue whose marble had learned flesh and didn't trust it yet. End it, Mira told the air. Now, the voice said, bored, and pushed. The pressure hit me in the chest like a board. I went back, boots skidding, shoulder hitting a vent that complained like a businessman in line. The gun slid. Rain made everything more dramatic and less useful. Astar put himself between us and the pressure again. It was a reflex like blinking. He took it low, absorbing, dispersing. The human shape buckling. I saw his hand shake once. A hairline crack in a god. Something terrifying and tender opened in me, like a door I'd nailed shut in childhood, and then forgotten. Stop, I said. The demon laughed again, the sound farther away than death. I looked at the city and saw the lines I'd been drawing my entire career. Flows, nets, narratives. The neon fire I'd lit below flickered at the roof's edge, like a fox. The sigil at my wrist burned steady and sure. Astar's shoulder was a wall, his breath a metronome. Mira's tablet was a knife that kept wanting to be a mirror. Okay, I said, and my voice was not calm, but it was decided. Okay. Then I'm done being your variable. I went to the edge of the roof and held up my hand like a blasphemy. The mark shone. The city answered, not with prayer, not with obedience, but with recognition. The networks I'd spent a decade learning named me back. I didn't pull code. I pulled context. I took the lie the demon had introduced, the cheapening, and replaced it with a more expensive truth. People still believed in stories, we had simply been telling them the wrong ones. I redirected the neon fire down into the building, through the racks, into the lake, into the feeds that fed the feeds. For 1 second, every screen in a 3-mile radius forgot their advertisements and showed a different message. A ring of light that meant a contract and a currency, and a refusal to be collateral. Somewhere, 1,000 fingers paused over 1,000 trades. Somewhere else, 1,000 eyes blinked. The pressure faltered. Who did you sell your first lie to? I asked the air. Silence, not powerlessness, surprise. Thought so, I said, and turned back. Mira watched me like I had grown a second head and it had better bone structure. What are you? She asked, quiet. Tired, I said. And done auditioning. She lifted the tablet anyway, because habits are heavier than ethics. Astar took 1 step forward on a knee that wanted a different life, and reached for me. I grabbed his wrist with my left hand, the marked one, and felt the system close a circuit. Gold surged under my skin. His eyes brightened, but not back to the weapon. Just enough to be a tool that still knew its name. On your feet, I said. I am. he said, and for the first time since I'd met him, it sounded like it cost him to say it. The demon in the rain decided on pettiness, and flung the wind at us. I let it take my hair, and not my balance. Mira looked at Astar, with something like love, and something like envy, and something like a casualty list. Then she set her jaw and threw her last command. I cut it in half. Not with brilliance. With stubbornness sharpened into a wedge. The code split. The drones lost their leader and discovered mortality. 2 tumbled into the street. 1 chose the river. The storm laughed because storms enjoy slapstick. The pressure in the air lifted by a degree. Astar's fingers tightened on mine, then loosened. You're rewriting, he said, awed and annoyed. My market. Ours, I said. Or, it's nothing. Lightning stitched the sky and signed its name. The demon's presence thinned, offended. A new headline somewhere turned into an error message. The lake below, my lake now, roared and receded. Mira lowered the tablet. The storm put pearls in her hair. For a heartbeat, she looked very young, and very old. He will discard you, she said. Not as a threat, but as an expectation of the universe. He can't, I said. And knew it was true before I knew why. We wrote it that way. She laughed once, short, cruel to herself, and backed toward the stairwell. Then enjoy the bill, she said, and vanished into the dark, with the economy of a magician who hadn't loved the trick. We stood there stupid in the rain, the city insisting on existing beneath us. Astar bent slightly as if the human shape had finally found its weight. I stepped into his space, the way you step into a room you built with your own hands. Our foreheads touched without asking permission. His breath tasted like metal and weather. Say it, he whispered, because he knew I would. Fine, I said, and let the sentence be a promise and a war plan. I'll finish your game, by my rules. He laughed, low and wrecked, and it sounded human enough to keep. The gold in his veins was an ember, not a blaze. He was almost mortal like this. Edges dulled, arrogance softened, eyes too readable. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to put my mouth on his and call it a strategy. I wanted to survive, and then make sure surviving wasn't the only trick we knew. Below us, sirens composed themselves into a habit. The roof dripped. The city glowed like a motherboard too stubborn to short. Neon pooled at the corners of the parapet and refused to go out. Somewhere, Eli watched a screen and learned the price of audacity. Somewhere else, Duncan Hale signed a document with a pen that would one day refuse to write his name. The storm moved a block and left us with the honest rain. I pressed my palm over the mark and felt, for the first time, that it answered me and not only him. I'm going to burn it, I said. Not to Astar, not to the demon in the vents, but to the idea of the market we'd been fed. I'm going to burn the rules and build a better ledger. Blasphemy, he said. Good, I said. He straightened. The human shape fit him a little better. We went back inside, dripping lawlessly, leaving wet footprints on a floor that had never earned that kind of intimacy. The server bay smelled like damp victory and fried mistakes. I holstered the gun I hadn't used enough, and sat at the console that had learned my touch. Outside, the sky kept pretending to end. Inside, we began again. The map to the place we needed did not use streets. It used debts. We took the maintenance stairwell that didn't exist on paper, stepped into an elevator that read, intention, instead of fingerprints, and descended into a shaft that wasn't vertical so much as moral. At the end of the drop, a door waited without a wall, its frame a loop of light you could mistake for art if you preferred your ignorance curated. A star touched the air beside it. Gold unfurled under his skin like a rumor. The loop opened. The room beyond had no edges, only consequences. Blue light drifting like slow water, glyphs unmoored from history, code suspended mid-inhale. Racks hovered without floor. Consoles bloomed when you looked at them and went shy when you didn't. In the ceiling, if ceiling applies to a place that refuses architecture, symbols turned lazily, casting soft halos the color of midnight aquariums. It smelled like cool metal and new rain, and the pause before a better idea. Between worlds, the data center wore its own heartbeat. "This is where you keep the old contracts," I said, stepping onto nothing that held, like faith. "Where they keep me," Astar said. The almost human fatigue from the roof had faded, but not entirely. He was less weapon now, more instrument. His eyes caught the blue and returned it warmer. "Not for long," I said, and my wrist mark warmed in agreement. The contract surfaced before us like a whale remembering air. Not paper, not even code, yet a script older than verbs, all hooks and vows and legalities too proud to admit they were superstitions. The runes were elegant with the arrogance of inherited wealth. "Charming typography," I said. "Unreadable by design." "Every power protects itself with handwriting," Astar said. "Then let's teach it ours." I lifted both hands and the room obliged, folding a console out of light and patience. The runes flowed into the scaffold I offered, sloughing off centuries the way bad software sheds patches. Their edges complained, then softened. I began where all my better rescues begin, with naming. "Parties," I said, and the old script hissed at the plural as if it preferred serfdom to dialogue. "Conditions," Astar added, voice low enough to settle the water. "And terms." I spoke the terms I'd demanded in the penthouse, and added the ones we'd earned on the roof. Sovereignty, mutual disclosure, exit without extinction, family immunity, error tolerances that don't punish curiosity. On the console, variables replaced sigils, functions took the place of threats, and dependencies arranged themselves into diagrams that looked like trust rendered in math. The contract tested itself against us. It found breaks it had always exploited: fear, vanity, hunger, pressed them, and found we did not open the old way. It tried leverage, we offered equity. It tried the sugared lie, we offered the inconvenient truth. Attribution, I said. No invisible hands. If we bend an outcome, the ledger knows which weight was ours. Astar's mouth curved. Not a smile exactly, the shadow a smile throws. Auditable sin, he murmured. Scandalous. Clause, I said, and the room held its breath. Neither owns. Both, build. The sentence hung there, simple as a nail, and everything rearranged around it. The runes dimmed, resentful, then slid into the syntax like old money buying a practical car. The loop of light around us brightened, then steadied. In my wrist, the mark hummed and settled, the warmth of a coin left in a palm. Consent checks every 4 decisions, I added. Every 3, Astar countered. 4. But the 4th includes cake. His eyes warmed, bargaining in pastry. Very human. Very effective, I said, and wrote a comment in the margin that future us would find and laugh at, or obey. The last thorn was the clause that had made him a commodity with exquisite manners. It sat at the contract's center like an antique table no one used and everyone protected. I touched it. It stung. Property? I said. Inheritance, he said. The word sounded tired. Not anymore. I replaced the rune with a function that evaluated mutual veto against shared purpose. The table sighed and became a workbench. Space cleared. The contract, offended and intrigued, asked for a signature. We don't sign in blood, I said. Never again, he agreed. We pressed wrists to the console. Gold met gold, mine newer, his older, both honest. The room brightened till the blue went almost white, then eased back like a tide with better manners. When the light settled, the contract had a body, not parchment, not flame, but an elegant, living schema, a map with no center that still knew where home was. Done, I whispered. Begun, he corrected. I looked at him and saw the choice we'd made, not the romance the world would narrate. For us, but the practical commitment not to turn each other into furniture. "All right," I said. "Let's steal a kingdom." The hell market layered under the human one, the way mold layers under wallpaper, busy, efficient, self-satisfied. We didn't topple it, we repointed it. The heist wasn't a single glorious act. It was a choreography of small indecencies, performed in the right order. We started with a corner of liquidity we'd starved last night with a rumor about an audit no one could prove. While the rumor argued with a correction, we slipped a siphon into a pipe labeled charter fees, and routed the flow into a vault with no physical correlate. Astar tilted probability, until bankers behaved like magicians misdirecting themselves. I found the seam where a philanthropic fund's impact index intersected a demon's favorite loophole, and wrote a script that turned both into fireworks. "New headline in 90 seconds, Astar said. His eyes flicked sideways, listening to a part of the market that still believed in news. "Make it 95%. I want the third paragraph to be mad." He did. And it was. We timed the big pulls, for when the market looked at itself in the mirror. A daily rebalance here. A monthly reweight there. Tranches unspooled like ribbon. Fees confessed their skeletons. A black pool dressed itself as rainwater to pass our gate, and failed the smell test. Astar's attention had a gravity you could watch in graphs. When he leaned on a position, it bent. When he backed off, it remembered embarrassment. And corrected. We moved like a duet at a quiet party. Steps small, consequences loud. Mira's shadow prowled the periphery. Twice I felt her hand on a valve, and twice I let her believe she'd closed it, while the bypass we'd built in the contract hummed beneath. A third time, she simply watched. I could feel the shape of her gaze and the way an algorithm hesitated before doing what it wanted. Once, she whispered through the wires. Too soft for microphones, just loud enough for nerve. "He will discard you." "He can't," I thought back. And our clauses held. The other demon, Hale's bargain, pressed here and there, changing pressure in the pipes. The way a child changes volume on a television when they think volume is agency. We made tiny insulting adjustments, siphoned a line, salted a wound, moved a decimal when no one was looking. It got bored or hungry, hard to tell, and wandered off toward cheaper prey. All predators economize. By the time the East went gold behind storm-smudged windows, our vault in the between place had become an address that could buy a country or feed one, depending on the memo. The ledger showed a pattern no one would recognize, until they learned how to read for absences. "Last step," Astar said. "Erase us," I said. "Elegantly," he said, as if we were discussing place settings. We wrote our disappearance like a gift to a future investigator, with ethics and bad timing, a plane that had left, a scarf caught on a fence, a charity gala sighting next to a man who didn't exist. Our accounts died loudly enough to draw applause. Our signatures broke into noise and recomposed as weather. The building's cameras remembered us long enough to grieve and then moved on. The market announced a correction, the way a body announces a fever. Forums misdiagnosed. Analysts performed necromancy on our graphs and called it closure. A tasteful memorial article ran with a photo of me that suggested I had loved a yacht and regretted nothing. "Dead?" I asked. "Elegantly," Astar said, listening to the wires. He closed his eyes, just for a second, for the pleasure of not being watched. The almost human tired from the roof returned to perch at the corner of his mouth. Without the weight of the contract's old ownership clause, he held himself differently. Less like a courthouse, more like a kitchen. "Hungry?" I asked. "Always," he said. And somehow it meant croissants this time. The office we built would have annoyed a magazine. It was cozy on purpose. A long table that remembered wood, 2 chairs that didn't match, a couch that forgave naps. The light was blue when we wanted to think, amber when we wanted to forgive ourselves. Coffee steamed in a glass carafe, like it had found a church it could finally believe in. Screens hung in the air without clutter, crisp as good gossip. Our logo didn't exist yet. Our name preferred to be a secret we told each other, and not the world. Astar sat with his long legs folded wrong for a brochure. Tie loosened, humanity visible like a wrist bone. I tucked my feet under me and pretended to engineer while mostly watching his edges settle into this new gravity. Between us floated a single display, a ledger we'd carved free. He lifted his cup. "You've just destabilized hell's economy. Consider it a market correction," I said, stealing his mug, because I liked the way his mouth protested with its eyebrows. "Investors will panic," he said. "Let them. Panic is an efficient teacher." "You're very unkind to systems," he said, "and not unkindly." "I'm kind to people," I said. "It's not the same." He considered that. "We'll need a public face." "I have a dead one," I said. "Free to a good home." "Obituaries do for some what publicity cannot," he said, wry. "Good. I'll send mine a thank you card." We watched a donation we hadn't made arrive at a clinic we'd chosen 2 weeks ago in case we lived. The ledger noted the gift as if it had always existed. It would again, every month, until the world learned to call it inevitable. "This feels illegal," I said. "It is," he said, "and moral." I reached across and took his free hand without announcing it to the minutes. He didn't look surprised. His skin was warmer than ambient. The gold under it, returned to ember, didn't need to show off. My wrist mark rested against his knuckles. The hum there matched the hum in the room. "Check in," I said. Because we had written it that way. "Consent?" "Present," he said. His voice made the word a place. "Terms?" "Neither owns," he said. "Both build," I finished. We drank coffee like people who had not slept on purpose. The screens rotated to softer tasks. A new protocol for whistleblowers who didn't want to die. A pipeline for assets that deserved gentler stewards. A sandbox labeled Eli that I was not yet ready to open, and was proud I could admit. "You're thinking about Ward," Astar said, reading my jaw as if it had subtitles. "I'm thinking about teaching him a lesson that doesn't become a hobby," I said. "Growth," he observed. "Cake claws," I said. He laughed, and it made the room warmer. On the master display, a symbol uncurled from the corner of the ledger, like a cat testing. A sunny spot. The ring that had once been a threat, then a signature, now a choice. It glowed gold, then paled, edges softening until the emblem found its civility. Lines extended, straightened, interlocked. Letters assembled themselves with the arrogance of fonts that know they look good. A and R, unlimited. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until my chest ached. Astar leaned back. Proprietary about nothing, pleased about everything. "There," he said. "There," I agreed. For a moment, the room felt like a balcony over a city we didn't have to burn to love. I stood and crossed to the thin window our office allowed itself. A square of elsewhere that showed nothing, unless asked nicely. The dark beyond it wasn't emptiness, but bandwidth. My reflection met me, woman. Hoodie traded for a shirt that had learned how to be soft, eyes tired in a way that meant alive. The mark at my wrist glowed once, then settled. "Rhea," Astar said behind me. A reminder and a preference. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it," I corrected. And the we didn't taste like surrender. The display brightened, catching 100 tiny deposits from 100 places that believed they were paying fees to an older machine. The current found our new riverbed and approved the gradient. Somewhere Hale made a call that would not be returned. Somewhere else, a demon with poor taste got bored and went hunting for a different show. Mira, wherever she was, watched a ledger lie to her, and knew exactly why. "Ready?" I asked. "For what?" "For being the good kind of myth," I said. He stood, came to my side, and we looked into the window that wasn't a window at all. Blue light softened the hard parts of his face. The city was absent and present. An option, not a threat. "On 3, I said, and he squeezed my hand once. A private punctuation. 1, he said. 2, I said. We didn't say 3. Some rituals don't need finishing to work. On the display, the gold ring completed its transformation into the logo, our logo. The letters settled into place and exhaled. I let the sight press itself into memory, the way you let a lover press a kiss into your collar, not as proof, but as promise. My voice found the narration it had been practicing since the morning the lights first died. Turns out, hell isn't beneath us. It's online. Good thing I own the server now. The room hummed its approval. The coffee steamed. The market, above and below, rearranged itself around the absence we had become. We stood in the middle of a story that had decided to keep us, not as villains or saints, but as authors. Neither owns. Both build.